Her shrill voice cracked the evening calm. "Your wife can't walk around here like that. She's going to hurt someone." I froze. My blind wife clutched her white cane, trembling as this woman, the HOA president, stood inches from her face, blocking her path like a guard dog. Neighbors peeked from their windows, phones in hand, but no one stepped forward. What she didn't know was that my phone was already live. The Accessibility Foundation I chair was watching every second unfold. And that's when I realized, if you've ever felt that surge of power when standing up to bullies, hit subscribe now. This showdown is about to become a masterclass in fighting back. I've spent my life fighting battles most people don't even see. Not the kind with fists or weapons, but the kind waged in courtrooms, council chambers, and board meetings. Battles about dignity, about fairness, about the right to live without being treated as less than. I am the chair of the National Accessibility Foundation. It sounds impressive, but at its heart, my job is simple. I fight for people who are overlooked, dismissed, or pushed aside because of disability. I know the loopholes, the regulations, the way institutions hide behind red tape. I know how power twists when it's left unchecked. But more than my professional title, more than my resume, what truly makes me fight is my wife. She wasn't born blind. She lost her sight 5 years ago, slowly, painfully, as her world dimmed into darkness. At first, it was hard for her to even walk across a room without clinging to walls. Every day was a test of patience, courage, and humility. She learned to navigate with a cane, to trust her other senses, to use adaptive technology that gave her independence again. I watched her transform frustration into quiet strength. But here's the truth no one tells you. When someone you love loses their sight, you lose pieces of your own world too. Not because they're weaker, but because society makes it harder. Every sidewalk crack becomes a threat. Every judgmental glance feels like a knife. Every whispered comment, "poor thing," or "what a burden," burns like fire. When we bought our home, it was supposed to be a sanctuary. We chose it because the streets were flat, the sidewalks wide, the community quiet. I wanted her to feel free again, to be able to walk to the mailbox, to breathe fresh air without fear. Home ownership wasn't just a financial investment. It was a promise that she could reclaim normal moments, picking up mail, tending the flowers, waving to neighbors. But that promise came with a catch, the HOA. A board meant to keep lawns trimmed and paint colors coordinated somehow turned into a dictatorship under one woman's control. At first, I brushed it off. After all, I'd seen worse. Corporations refusing wheelchair ramps, cities denying funding for accessible crosswalks. I thought, this is just a neighborhood. Quirk, a bit of pettiness. Nothing serious. I was wrong. What started as notices about grass height and mailboxes quickly became targeted. My wife's cane, a hazard. The safety rail we installed by the steps, unapproved modification. The textured strip near the driveway to prevent slips, violating aesthetics. Every time she tried to reclaim a sliver of freedom, the HOA president, Karen, found a way to strip it back. And for me, it wasn't just an annoyance, it was personal. Because I know the cost of silence. I've sat across from families broken because they didn't push back soon enough. I've seen institutions grind people down until they stop fighting, and I refuse to let that happen to my wife. I don't fight because I like conflict. I fight because the world has shown me what happens when you don't. My skills? I've stood in front of Congress, testifying about accessibility laws. I've worked with lawyers who pick apart loopholes like surgeons with scalpels. I've led campaigns that reshaped public transit systems to include ramps, lifts, and audio cues. I've learned how to gather evidence, how to build cases, how to tell a story that no one can ignore. But all of that pales in comparison to the look on my wife's face when she's told she doesn't belong. When a stranger, or in this case, a neighbor, takes away her confidence with a few sharp words, that look steals me more than any paycheck, more than any award, more than any applause. Because here's the heart of it. This fight isn't about bylaws or fines. It's about humanity. It's about saying to my wife, you deserve to be here. You deserve peace. You deserve freedom. That's why I fight. And when Karen decided to cross the line from petty rules into harassment, she didn't just pick a fight with my wife, she picked a fight with me, and she had no idea who she was up against. Karen wasn't just an HOA president. She was a predator who wore rules like camouflage. At first, I thought her nitpicking was just part of the job. HOAs exist to keep order, right? But very quickly I saw the pattern, and it was calculated. She never went after everyone at once. That's what made her dangerous. She'd pick a target, zero in, and grind them down with letters, fines, and public scoldings until they either submitted or moved out. Then she'd move to the next. It was power by isolation. The first time I noticed it, she left a note on our door. Mailbox paint chipped. Please repaint within 72 hours to maintain community standards. I went outside and stared at it. The mailbox was practically new. The paint was fine. But sure enough, 2 houses down, where one of her friends lived, the mailbox looked like it had been through a war zone. Rust eating at the sides, numbers peeling off. Not a word from Karen. Next came the lawns. She fined a single dad on the corner for grass overgrowth when he'd been gone for 3 days, taking care of his sick mother. Meanwhile, Karen's best friend across the street had weeds tall enough to hide a small dog. No fine, no warning, nothing. The message was clear. Rules didn't apply equally. They were weapons she aimed at whoever she didn't like. But it wasn't just the selective enforcement. It was the way she watched people. Neighbors would whisper about how she walked the streets at night, clipboard in hand, jotting down infractions under the cover of darkness. Porch lights would catch her silhouette. Sometimes people would wake up to find her in their yard, snapping photos of fence lines or measuring hedges with a tape measure. Once, I caught her crouched at the edge of my driveway, staring at the textured strip I'd installed to help my wife find her bearings safely. She didn't even flinch when I opened the door. She just said, "This isn't compliant. I'll be sending a notice," and then walked off, like she owned the place. My stomach turned cold. This wasn't oversight. It was obsession. What chilled me most was who she chose. It was never the wealthy families with resources to fight back. Never the social butterflies with big friend groups. She went after the elderly, the single parents, the newcomers, people who didn't have the time, energy, or confidence to stand up to her. And now, my wife. The first comment was framed as concern. Karen said, "It's so brave of her to walk outside like that. But don't you think the cane is risky? Someone could trip." I forced a smile. "The cane keeps her safe. It's not the problem, but that was only the beginning." Soon after, we got a letter. Unapproved railing modification. Please remove immediately. The railing wasn't decoration. It was stability for my wife. Then came textured strip not in compliance with HOA aesthetic. That strip prevented falls. Every safety measure, every adaptation, she treated as a violation. It wasn't just harassment, it was erasure. She wanted to strip away the tools that gave my wife independence, until all that was left was dependence and fear. Neighbors noticed, but no one stepped in. Why? Because they'd all seen what happened when someone pushed back. One family tried. They confronted her about the bogus lawn fines. Suddenly, they were buried in violation letters, a loose shutter, a cracked flower pot, an unregistered vehicle for their teenager's car that sat in the driveway. Within 6 months, they sold their house and moved away. Karen didn't need to win arguments. She won wars of attrition. People gave up because living under her rule was unbearable. That's how she kept control, through exhaustion and fear. And the most sinister part? In public, she wore the sweetest smile. At HOA gatherings, she'd bake cookies and hand them out like a doting grandmother. She'd talk about community spirit and keeping property values high. People who didn't live under her microscope thought she was just dedicated. But those of us who'd been targeted knew the truth. Behind that smile was a scalpel, ready to cut you down if you dared resist. I've faced CEOs who tried to stonewall accessibility laws. I've faced politicians who dismissed disability rights as low priority. But this was different. Karen didn't have millions or political office. She had something far sharper, petty power on a small scale, wielded with personal malice. And that made her unpredictable, dangerous. Because when someone convinces themselves they're the guardian of order, there's no line they won't cross. And as much as I wanted to believe it would stop with letters and warnings, deep down, I knew better. Karen wasn't finished with us. She was just warming up. It started with an envelope, a plain white one, taped crookedly to my door like a threat dressed up in stationery. I pulled it down, already sensing what it was. Inside, in the HOA's official letterhead, were the words that made my blood run cold. Final notice. Immediate removal of unapproved modifications, railing and driveway strip, required. Daily fines of $250 will accrue until compliance is met. $250, every single day, for the very tools that gave my wife independence. I read it twice, then 3 times. My wife stood behind me, holding her cane, asking quietly, "What does it say?" I couldn't bring myself to tell her at first, because what it really said wasn't about rules or aesthetics. It said, "We want you trapped. We want you afraid." 2 days later, Karen arrived with 2 board members in tow. She didn't knock, she didn't call ahead. She just stood on our porch, clipboard at the ready, announcing loudly for the entire street to hear, "We're conducting a safety inspection. Please step aside." My wife had been sitting on the porch, enjoying the warmth of the sun. She stiffened when Karen's shadow fell over her. "What inspection?" I asked. Karen tapped her clipboard. "We received reports that your so-called accessibility modifications are a liability. If someone trips over that strip, the HOA could be sued." "That strip is for my wife," I shot back. "It prevents accidents. You'd know that if you cared about safety instead of—" "Sir," she cut me off, voice dripping with condescension. "We're not here to debate. We're here to enforce." Then, unbelievably, she leaned down toward my wife and said, "Don't you feel embarrassed making everyone adjust for you?" I swear my fist clenched so tight my knuckles cracked. Neighbors gathered across the street, pretending not to stare. A few whispered. Karen knew exactly what she was doing, making a spectacle, turning my wife into the neighborhood problem. That night, my wife broke down. Not from the fines, not from the threats, but from humiliation. "I don't even want to walk outside anymore," she whispered. "Every step feels like I'm making people angry." I held her, feeling her tremble. She had survived losing her sight with grace, fought to regain her independence. And in just one afternoon, Karen managed to chip away at all of it. Fear became a new guest in our home. We started double-locking doors. My wife asked me to walk her to the mailbox, even though she had been so proud to do it alone. Sleep became restless. Every creak outside felt like another intrusion. My health suffered too. Stress curled into my chest like a fist. My work with the foundation demanded focus, but every spare thought circled back to Karen. How far would she go? What was her end game? The following week, another envelope arrived. This one wasn't taped. It was shoved so deep into our mailbox, I thought the metal had bent around it. Due to continued noncompliance, a lien may be placed on your property. Foreclosure action may be pursued in accordance with HOA bylaws. A lien. Foreclosure. For a handrail. For a textured strip of rubber. For refusing to make my wife a prisoner in her own home. When I told her, she went pale. "They can take our house? Just take it?" "They can try," I said. But even as the words left my lips, I wasn't sure. HOAS had power, and Karen had already shown she wasn't afraid to wield it like a weapon. We don't have kids of our own, but the neighborhood is full of them. Some of them had always greeted my wife warmly, curious about her cane. She'd smile, kneel down, and explain how it worked, showing them how the tip tapped against the ground. After Karen's inspection, the children stopped approaching. Parents hurried them inside when we walked past. "She's making me look like a danger," my wife said one afternoon, her voice breaking. "Like I don't belong around kids. Like I'm something to hide." I had no words, just rage. That's when I knew this wasn't about fines or bylaws anymore. Karen wasn't just enforcing rules. She was eroding my wife's spirit, brick by brick. And that's a line you don't cross. I stayed up late that night, staring at the stack of violation letters on my desk, each one heavier than the last. The fear in my wife's eyes replayed in my mind. That was the moment I made a decision. No more playing defense. No more waiting for the next envelope, the next humiliation. If Karen wanted a war, she'd get one. But not the kind she expected. Because while she was busy writing letters and staging inspections, I was already documenting everything. I had footage, timestamps, witnesses, and she had no idea that every move she made was tightening the noose. Not around us, but around her. The night it happened, the air was heavy. The kind of silence before a storm. My wife and I had just finished dinner. She was washing her hands at the sink, humming softly, when the first flash of blue and red bled through our curtains. I thought it was a mistake at first. An accident down the street maybe, but then came the pounding on the door. Bang, bang, bang. Police! Open up! My wife froze. Her cane slipped from her hand and clattered against the tile. My heart jumped into my throat. I opened the door slowly, hands raised. 2 officers stood on the porch, hands near their holsters, faces tense. Behind them, our cul-de-sac was lit up with squad cars. Neighbors lined the sidewalks, phones out, whispering. "Sir," one officer barked, "we received a report of a domestic disturbance. Possible hostage situation." My stomach dropped. A hostage situation? My wife stepped into the doorway, blind eyes wide with fear. She whispered, "What's happening?" The officer's eyes flicked to her, then back to me. "Is she safe?" We were told she might be in danger. That's when I saw her. Karen, standing smugly on the curb, arms folded, whispering to another neighbor like she'd orchestrated a play and was watching the final act. She had called the police, lied to them, told them I was holding my blind wife hostage in our own home. The officers stepped inside without waiting. They searched the living room, the kitchen, the hallway, hands on weapons the whole time. My wife clung to me, trembling. I can't do this," she whispered. Her chest rose and fell in sharp, panicked bursts. I could hear her cane still on the kitchen floor, abandoned where it fell. That image seared into me, the very symbol of her independence left behind, because fear had taken over. I tried to explain, calmly, methodically, like I had in countless hearings. "Officers, please. There is no disturbance here. This is harassment. This is the HOA president abusing her power." They weren't convinced, not yet. They asked my wife if she was safe. She stammered, nodded, clutched my arm like a lifeline. And then, one of the officers noticed the camera. Mounted high on the wall, our home security system had caught everything from the moment the sirens appeared. And what they didn't know, what Karen didn't know, was that my phone had been running a live stream since the first knock. Hundreds of Foundation members were already watching, commenting, clipping, archiving. The scene dragged on for what felt like hours. My wife was shaking so hard I had to steady her just to keep her upright. At one point she whispered, "Are they going to take you? Are they going to arrest you?" The thought burned through me. Karen had managed to make my wife afraid not of her anymore, but of the police, of the very people sworn to protect. It was psychological warfare. And in that moment, I saw exactly what Karen wanted. Not compliance, not fines, but destruction. She wanted us broken, humiliated, driven out. And for a second, I almost believed she'd succeed. But then, one officer came back from speaking with dispatch. His voice lowered as he pulled his partner aside. The caller claimed the woman was screaming. Neighbors didn't hear anything. Feels off. The other officer's eyes flicked to me, then to my wife, still trembling in the doorway. I seized the moment. "Check the footage," I said, pointing to the camera. "It's all right there. Time-stamped, unedited. You'll see the truth." He hesitated, then nodded. I pulled up the live stream on my phone, rewound, showed them everything. The calm dinner, the sudden flashing lights, the pounding on the door. No screams, no violence. Nothing but a blind woman startled out of her peace by a malicious lie. And there, at the edge of the frame, Karen's figure, watching smugly from the street. The officer's jaw tightened. He exchanged a glance with his partner. Something shifted. They left without arrests, but the damage was done. The neighbors who had watched the chaos unfold whispered louder now. Not about us, but about her. About Karen. My wife didn't sleep that night. Every sound outside made her flinch. At one point, she asked if we should leave, if we should sell the house and run. The suggestion cut deeper than any fine or threat. I held her hand and whispered back, "No, that's exactly what she wants. And I won't give her the satisfaction." But inside, I burned. This wasn't just harassment anymore. This was attempted character assassination, weaponized lies that nearly put my family in danger. And Karen thought she'd gotten away with it. She didn't realize the live stream was still active, that hundreds of witnesses had already clipped the footage, that the truth was no longer just mine to tell. It was out there, undeniable. The breaking point wasn't just hers, it was mine too. Because that night, as I sat awake replaying the flashing lights and my wife's trembling voice, I made a vow. This fight wasn't about survival anymore. It was about justice. The morning after the police raid, our house still felt haunted. My wife jumped at every knock, every passing car. The flashing lights had burned into her memory, and I could still hear the pounding on the door in my chest. But grief and fear quickly hardened into focus. I wasn't just going to fight back. I was going to prove, beyond any doubt, that Karen had crossed the line. And once the truth was out, she wouldn't be able to hide behind bylaws, clipboards, or sweet smiles at HOA meetings. I started with the security footage. I pulled it onto my computer, frame by frame. The recording showed everything. My wife rinsing her hands in the kitchen, me setting the table, the sudden flash of lights, the pounding on the door, and most importantly, the absence of anything else. No screaming, no shouting, no violence. Then I zoomed in on the edge of the frame. There she was, Karen, standing in the street, smug, watching it all unfold like she'd orchestrated a stage play. I cross-referenced the timestamp with the police dispatch log, which I requested through a public records request. The call had come in at 7:46 p.m., claiming domestic disturbance, possible hostage. The footage at 7:46 showed me calmly setting silverware on the table, my wife humming softly in the kitchen. That was it. The proof. She lied, and the call nearly got me arrested. Or worse. I didn't need legal jargon to understand the weight of that. It was simple. The video shows no disturbance. The police log shows she claimed one. That's called a false report. And that's a crime. Next, I went door to door. Some neighbors looked nervous opening their doors to me. Others avoided eye contact. Fear of Karen's retaliation hung thick over the street. But a few spoke up. One elderly neighbor whispered, "I didn't hear a thing that night." Not until the sirens. I thought it was strange. She looked around before adding, "She came by my house earlier that day. Asked if I ever heard yelling from yours. I told her no." She didn't like that answer. Another family admitted they had video from their Ring camera. It showed Karen pacing near my yard right before the police arrived, her phone pressed to her ear. Piece by piece, her lie unraveled. The real crack came from within. Late one evening, I received an email from an HOA board member, anonymous at first. It read, "I've seen enough. What she's doing to your family isn't right. She's been manipulating reports, bending rules, and silencing dissent for years. If you need proof, I'm willing to talk." I replied immediately. The next night, we met in the dim corner of a coffee shop miles away from the neighborhood. He was nervous, glancing over his shoulder like Karen might leap from the shadows. "She keeps a separate file," he confessed. "One for her friends, one for her enemies. Infractions disappear if you're loyal. If you're not, she piles them on until you break." He slid a folder across the table. Inside were copies of emails she'd sent the board, mocking residents, bragging about teaching lessons, even suggesting ways to nudge out families she didn't like. One line burned into my mind. "If we make life uncomfortable enough, they'll move." It's easier than a vote that wasn't community leadership. That was targeted harassment. I gathered everything. Video footage of the night the police came. Police call logs proving her report was false. Witness statements from neighbors. Ring camera footage of her on the phone before the raid. Internal emails showing her intent to harass. I organized it like a puzzle, each piece sliding into place until the picture was undeniable. I didn't just want to confront her. I wanted to make sure that when the truth hit daylight, she couldn't wriggle out with excuses or lies. Word began to spread, quietly at first, then louder. Neighbors who had once avoided us started nodding in solidarity. One mother walked over, holding her daughter's hand, and whispered, "I'm sorry. My little girl misses talking to your wife. We were afraid of Karen, but after what happened, we see it now. She's gone too far." The fear that once insulated Karen was starting to crack. For the first time, people were questioning whether the queen of the cul-de-sac was really protecting them, or terrorizing them. And I could feel it. The tide was turning. One night, as I sat with my wife on the porch, she squeezed my hand. "You're really going to do it, aren't you?" she asked. "Do what?" I replied, though I knew. "Bring her down." I looked out at the quiet street, the same one that had been turned into a stage for her cruelty. I thought about the neighbors who lived in fear, the families who had already fled, the weight of every violation letter stuffed into mailboxes. "Yes," I said finally, "not just for us. For everyone she's hurt, because the truth was ready. The evidence was airtight. The witnesses were waiting. And the next HOA meeting wasn't just going to be a formality. It was going to be a reckoning. The HOA meeting that night was standing room only. Folding chairs scraped against linoleum, neighbors packed shoulder to shoulder, whispers buzzing like static in the air. Everyone knew something was coming. At the front sat the board, Karen in the center seat like a queen on her throne. She wore her sweetest smile, a plate of store-bought cookies laid neatly in front of her as if sugar could mask venom. She tapped the microphone. "Let's begin," she said, voice calm, confident. "First on the agenda, ongoing violations at the residence of..." She paused for effect, eyes locking on me. "The Johnson household." Gasps rippled through the room. I stood slowly, holding a binder thick with evidence under one arm and my phone in the other. My wife sat behind me, cane across her lap, chin lifted with quiet defiance. Karen cleared her throat. "As many of you know, this property has been a repeated source of non-compliance, unauthorized railings, hazardous driveway strips, and, of course, disturbances." "Stop." My voice cut across the room. Firm, sharp. Years of advocacy work had trained me for this moment. The room went silent. "I will not sit here and let you twist the truth any longer." Karen's smile flickered. "Excuse me?" I placed the binder on the table with a heavy thud. "Excuse me. You've hidden behind rules and bylaws long enough. But tonight, everyone here is going to see who you really are." Karen chuckled softly, trying to maintain control. "Neighbors, please. You all know I only enforce the rules fairly. Without them, property values would plummet. Without them, chaos would reign." A few nodded uneasily. She still had influence. "Fairly," I said, pulling out the first document. "Then explain this." I held up a violation notice sent to me for unapproved railing modifications. Then another photo of a board member's porch with the exact same railing style. "No, violation." Murmurs erupted. Karen's cheeks flushed. Those were different circumstances. I flipped the page. Or this. A notice about our textured strip being aesthetic non-compliance. Yet, here's your close friend's property. Same strip, same material. No notice. The murmurs grew louder. Karen leaned forward, voice rising. "You're cherry-picking. These examples mean nothing." I smiled thinly. "Then let's move to the night you crossed the line." I connected my phone to the projector. The screen lit up with grainy security footage. Our quiet kitchen, my wife humming, the sudden blast of red and blue lights outside. Gasps filled the room. The footage continued. Officers pounding on the door, entering our home, my wife trembling. And then... The camera caught Karen's figure at the edge of the street, phone in hand, watching. I froze the frame, enlarged it. "She called the police," I said, voice steady. "She reported a hostage situation that never existed. She weaponized law enforcement against a blind woman and her husband, and I can prove it." I clicked to the next slide. The police call log, time-stamped 7:46 p.m., alleged disturbance. Now match it to the video timestamp. At 7:46, my wife was rinsing her hands at the sink. No disturbance, no screams, no violence. The room was dead silent. You could hear hearts pounding. Karen stammered, That's circumstantial. Anyone could..." I cut her off. "No, because we also have this The projector switched to footage from a neighbor's Ring camera, Karen pacing near my yard, phone pressed to her ear, minutes before the police arrived. Gasps turned into outrage. A voice from the back shouted, "Are you kidding me?" Another neighbor muttered, "She could have gotten them killed." Karen's mask shattered. She slammed a hand on the table. "You don't understand. I was protecting the neighborhood. I thought—" "No," I snapped. "You weren't protecting anyone. You were targeting us. You've been targeting people for years. Selective enforcement, harassment, lies. And here's the proof." I opened the binder and slid copies of her internal emails across the table. One board member picked it up, face paling as he read aloud, "If we make life uncomfortable enough, they'll move. It's easier than a vote." The room erupted, voices overlapping, neighbors shouting, some standing. "You did this to us too. She fined me for nothing. You made us live in fear." Karen looked around, desperate, the room spinning out of her control. I stepped closer, lowering my voice so it cut like steel. "You abused your power. You humiliated my wife. You lied to the police. And tonight, everyone sees it. You don't deserve this seat. You don't deserve this title." The board member who had contacted me earlier stood up. I motioned to censure Karen immediately and remove her from her position as president. "I second it," another board member said. Hands shot up across the room, voices rising in agreement. Karen's voice cracked. "You can't do this. I am the HOA." "No," I said. "You were. Not anymore." The vote was unanimous. The gavel, symbolic though it was, came down hard. Karen slumped back in her chair, cookies untouched, eyes wide with disbelief. For once, she had no words. As the meeting adjourned, neighbors gathered around us. One mother hugged my wife and whispered, "I'm so sorry. We should have spoken up sooner." Others shook my hand, thanked me, promised things would change. Karen slipped out the side door, head low, clipboard clutched like a shield. But her reign was over, and for the first time in months, I felt the tightness in my chest ease. The fight wasn't finished, but the tide had turned. The morning after the showdown felt different. For months, stepping outside had carried weight, a knot in the stomach, the invisible pressure of eyes watching, judging, waiting to pounce. But that morning, the street was quiet in a way that felt clean, free. My wife stood at the doorway, her cane in hand. Her fingers traced the railing she'd once been ordered to remove. She took a deep breath. Then she said softly, "I want to walk to the mailbox." I nodded, my throat tight. This time, she didn't hesitate. She tapped her way down the porch, the cane clicking against the textured strip in the driveway, step by step, steady and sure. Neighbors peeked out, but instead of silence or whispers, one of them called, "Morning." Another waved. She reached the mailbox, opened it, pulled out a letter. Just like that, something ordinary became extraordinary again. Independence reclaimed. I blinked hard to clear my eyes. That simple walk was the victory. That weekend, we invited neighbors over. For too long, Karen had used gatherings to spread fear. We decided to reclaim the space with something different. A planting. Right by the mailbox, we dug a hole together and placed a young oak tree inside. My wife pressed soil around its roots with her hands. "Something strong," she said, "something that will last." The tree became a symbol, not just of resistance, but of growth, of refusing to be uprooted by one person's cruelty. Another neighbor repainted their own mailbox and joked, "Guess we're all in violation now." Laughter rippled through the crowd, a sound we hadn't heard in months. The HOA board restructured quickly. The member who had slipped me Karen's emails stepped up as interim president. He called a meeting not in a sterile hall, but on a neighbor's lawn, potluck style. Instead of accusations, people shared ideas. A block party, a community garden, a kid's art mural on the sidewalk. It felt like a neighborhood again. Families who had once kept their distance now stopped by our porch to chat. Children approached my wife again, curious about her cane. She smiled and knelt to show them how it worked, tapping it against the ground. Their laughter was bright, untainted by fear. One father admitted, "I thought speaking up would just make things worse. But after seeing what you did, I realized silence only feeds bullies." The cracks Karen had left were being filled, not with plaster, but with connection. For my wife, the change was profound. Nights grew quieter, her sleep less restless. The trembling that had haunted her after the false police call slowly faded. She started gardening again, hands buried in the soil she loved. She walked to the mailbox every morning without asking me to come along. One evening, she stood under the oak tree we'd planted and said, "I feel safe here again." That sentence was everything. For me, the fight had been about evidence, strategy, justice. But for her, it had been about dignity. And seeing her reclaim it made every sleepless night worth it. Karen never apologized. She avoided the neighborhood, eventually selling her home. When the moving truck pulled away, no one waved. No one mourned her departure. She'd ruled through fear, and fear vanished the moment her grip loosened. In her absence, the neighborhood bloomed. Porch lights twinkled at night. Laughter carried down sidewalks. And for the first time, our street felt like the promise it had always been. Months later, I was asked to speak at a foundation event about what had happened. I told the story, not as a legal case, but as a human one, about how one woman's abuse of power nearly broke a family, but also about how community, truth, and persistence turned the tide. The footage we captured became a training tool, shown in workshops about accessibility, bias, and harassment. What Karen had meant as humiliation became evidence that fueled change. And every time I passed that oak tree, its branches reaching higher, I remember the roots of resilience grow deeper than fear. If there's one lesson in all of this, it's simple. Silence lets bullies thrive. Whether it's a corporation, a politician, or a neighborhood tyrant with a clipboard, power unchecked becomes poison. But when you shine light on it, when you refuse to bow your head, you take that power back. We didn't just win against Karen. We reclaimed our home, our peace, our community. And if you've ever been in our shoes, if you've ever had an HOA abuse its power or watched someone try to strip your dignity away, know this: you're not alone. You can fight back, and you can win. So, I'll leave you with this. If you've ever had an HOA abuse power, subscribe now and share your story in the comments. Together, we make sure no one else faces this fight alone.